All right, awesome. Okay, so I apologize for the classroom, obviously. A little bit out of my control. I did send an email to Ross because I wasn't expecting this thing, whatever this is. Yeah, so hopefully we will be moving for the next class. Once I know more, I will contact you guys through announcements and through Slack for those of you that are in the Slack channel already. Notifying you which classroom we're actually moving to, but this definitely is not going to work, or this needs to move. Something needs to move. Or we'll just do it outside. All right, so, I mean, why not, right? It's beautiful out. Okay, so this is the JavaScript frameworks class, so if you were expecting cooking class, you were in the wrong class. Or the right class, depending on how you look at it. But this class is basically about the mean stack or the MERN stack. We're going to use the MERN stack. A stack is usually a group of technologies encompassing how you're storing your data, how you're storing or how you're processing your server-side code, how you're processing your client-side code, right? So the stack we're using is Mongo, which will be our actual database layer. Express, which will handle some of our routing and some of our construction. And we'll be using React instead of Angular. So if you're expecting to use Angular, unfortunately we won't be. We'll be using React, but I find React is a good stepping stone anyways, because from React you can move to Angular quite easily. But I find React is a lot easier to wrap your head around and to learn than React is, or than Angular is. And then the last piece, probably the most fundamental piece that we'll be covering over the next 6 weeks, will be the node part, which is, don't get scared, it's just JavaScript. That's all it is, which you guys had a whole semester in, right? Everybody's had a semester of JavaScript? Anybody not have a semester of JavaScript yet? Okay, well, we're doing a review today. We're basically going to take 12 weeks and condense it into an hour and a half, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so that being said, let me quickly show you something interesting, if I can figure out which mouse is which. All right. Underneath your Blackboard, which I didn't realize you guys were group 2. You'd think logically you'd be group 1, but you're group 2. Underneath your Blackboard, there's a link inside the side column that says resources. Underneath the resources, of course you can't see it up there because I'm not sharing my screen up there. Let me share my screen. There we go. I don't know why it goes super tiny. It's really weird. There we go. Okay, you'll see this resource panel with these resources inside them. The bottom one here is the past JavaScript class modules. If you click on that, it will take you to this, and this is all 14 weeks of class, essentially. So those that had me last semester will recognize this, obviously. Those of you who had this semester previous, this is what your class basically turned into. They're interactive. You can actually go into them. There's little code blocks, like this practice code block. You can type code directly in here, hit execute, and it will actually process that code for you in the browser and give you some feedback on it right away. So if you want to recap your JavaScript, because some of you have not done it for a semester, then this is the best resource that I can mention. Other than that, MDN is definitely a good resource, obviously. Code Academy, Udemy, any of those guys, if you just need a quick recap on JavaScript or help understand what JavaScript is, then I definitely recommend that. Otherwise, we will be talking about quite a bit of it over the next 2 weeks because we're going to cover some things that we didn't cover in the first semester. So that will be asynchronicity. We're actually going to take a look at asynchronicity, like blocking and non-blocking code, because that's essential. And we're going to talk about ways to deal with blocking and non-blocking code, such as callbacks, promises, and async and await, which are methods for us to deal with blocking and non-blocking code. But yeah, so that's there for you. There's a few other resources you'll see there. There's the group member sign up. Don't bother with that yet. We'll talk about that. There's the syllabus, which should be okay. I think it might need some edits. If I make edits, then I'll post them. But the most important one would be the way to communicate with Sean, which anybody who has signed up to Slack will tell you right off the bat, this is the fastest way to get a hold of me. I usually respond within an hour or two. I even respond at work when I shouldn't be, but I respond anyways. Email is the slowest way to get my attention because every so often Georgian changes my passwords and I don't know about it for like a week until I go to log in Blackboard and it doesn't work. Then I find out. So definitely the Slack invite link, do it. Just do it. Because It's also pretty much an industry standard tool for communication in a lot of industrial environments. Like I know we use it in our place. We used it at Fireside when I worked there. We used it as a tool for university as well. So it's definitely something worth acknowledging and understanding because it can make your life a lot easier for talking with me. All right, cool. I have a slide deck, but I don't know if I want to show it. Let me just quickly see what I'm covering here. Yeah, I'm not going to show it because it's silly. I cover so much more without that. All right, cool. One other thing, just talking about Blackboard, our weekly learning that we'll do from week to week will be under the weekly learning column. I'm pretty sure that's self-explanatory. It'll be broken down into separated weeks like this, and inside this folder will be usually a link to our lesson plan. Sometimes I will give you starter files. It's rare though. I think I tend to give starter files when it comes to like HTML, just because it's so time consuming for all of us to sit there and code out HTML, and it's not necessary. So usually I'll give you like starter HTML, but then we'll code the actual code. And then if there's anything inside the HTML, such as like we'll be covering JSX, which is their JavaScript pages. Oh, is it JSX or JST? JSW? I can't remember. It's a template file. Anyways, it has JavaScript embedded into the HTML. I'll provide you the HTML, but then we'll go in and embed the actual JavaScript inside of it, because you guys already know HTML. Did anybody not take an HTML course? Cool. That's a good thing. So that's the only real time you'll actually see starter files. For the most part, and the starter files will actually probably just be a GitHub link. You'll just pull the Git. You'll just clone it. Otherwise, you'll see it broken like this. So you'll have lesson plan file, which you're welcome to interact with. Currently, they're PDFs. I'm hoping for next week to have it as an online actual repository so that you can just quickly go there and surf through it, click links, that type of thing. And not be a PDF, but for now it's a PDF. And then in this lesson, there's a download link that we'll get to probably in the next half. Cool. Other than that, I don't know if you can see them yet because there isn't any information. But there'll also be labs, quizzes, and assignments too. They're also in that list. Everything else is like your grades and your custom stuff. Oh, there's a project too, which we'll talk about. Actually, there is no assignments in this class. There's only projects. Project. Okay, cool. Most of you know me. I think there's like 3 unfamiliar faces in this whole class. But I'll introduce myself. I'm Sean. I taught the JavaScript for most of you, your introduction to JavaScript before this. I don't think any of you have had me for anything else. Did any of you have me C++? No. Yeah, so it's just intro to JavaScript. Yeah, so I taught that course. I've taught quite a few different courses. I think I've taught about 6 different courses at Georgian so far. JavaScript is definitely my favorite. I wouldn't have said that 4 years ago, but it's my favorite now. Though I do like to occasionally do the bitmap and vector class because I'm shit at graphics, but it's so much fun to teach a bunch of people how to work with graphics from a coding standpoint, which kind of blows your mind a little bit, but yeah, that's fun. So my education, I did the same thing you guys are doing, except for not programming analyst. I took the web course that was here at the time. It was web design and animation using Flash, which was dead then. It was completely dead then. But we used it anyways. We had a really cool teacher. His name was Rui. He actually did the art for Little Bear. Do you guys remember Little Bear from Treehouse? No? My Little Pony? No? What? Okay, well, he did the artwork for Little Bear and My Little Pony. He was a pretty cool teacher. Other than that, from that, I moved on to teaching almost a year out. And then I moved into university to help advance my skill sets a little bit more. I took university in game design and development for 1 year and then realized how much I hate math, and I left university. That's basically what happened there. I would say for a personality standpoint, I'm very, very easygoing. I don't like to just stand up here and talk for 3 hours. I do like participation and feedback. I get more excited that way. I have ADHD, so I tend to pace back and forth as well quite a bit. Yeah, I'm super easygoing. The only time that I get kind of annoyed is with like misconduct things. That's the only thing I get annoyed about. Other than that, I would say I don't really care about most stuff that way. Like I'm pretty easygoing. Communication, we talked about that. Yeah, that's basically it. Any questions? No? Cool. Let's talk about what we're going to learn about. JavaScript frameworks. This is a weird title. You can't even see. Why am I not sharing the screen? Actually, it doesn't matter. You can open up the lesson plan. It's right there. So, JavaScript frameworks. So, last semester we learned about JavaScript. So we took a look more at the vanilla idea of JavaScript, working with variables and the different syntax structures that you need to know for JavaScript, because it is different than working with Java or even with PHP or anything like that. This is more talking about actual frameworks, right? And frameworks are pretty cool because frameworks basically give us a way to interact with a language and complete a solution that other people have already done, starting with like a nice pre-built template. That's usually, following best practices and stuff like that. And there's a lot of different frameworks out there. Some of you guys have already probably used like Bootstrap, right? You guys have used Twitter Bootstrap, yeah. Any of you use HTML5 boilerplate before? Couple? Yeah, that's a framework as well. There's a few MVC frameworks as well. MVC stands for Model View Controller, for those of you that don't know, such as Laravel, CakePHP, Symfony, right? Ruby has Ruby on Rails, which I primarily code in, and Sinatra. And then JavaScript, we have the Express Generator, Meteor, React.js, which we'll be doing in this class, Angular, Ember, Vue. There's a whole whack of them. And basically the cool thing about frameworks is to give you these existing code structures that help make building your applications a lot simpler. But in addition, they also follow best practice code, right? And they try to enforce it using their conventions. They create conventions that force you to code in a certain way that tends to be more beneficial to you and works a lot better. And the best piece of advice I can give to you about frameworks, try to abide by the rules of the framework. Don't try to break outside the framework, because that's when shit goes sideways. Try to do what the framework tells you to do. We will be using some frameworks. A lot of it will be coding from scratch. Node.js is a framework. It gives us a nice library for actually serving up HTML and CSS and stuff like that out of the box. That's not what it's natively meant for, but it does do that out of the box. Express.js, which will allow us to be able to do things like routing. Did you guys take ASP MVC last semester? So you know what routing is? Yeah. So Express will actually handle our routing for us, and we'll look more at that in depth. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. We're going to be using something called Mongoose, which is a JavaScript framework that's layered on top of Mongo, and it basically allows interacting with Mongo a lot easier. It's actually called an ODM, which stands for Object Data Modeler. Basically what it does is it just makes querying Mongo really simple, creating relationships in Mongo very simple, stuff like that. It makes our lives a lot simpler. And then we're also going to be using React.js, obviously, which is a client-side library for creating single-page applications and single-page views is essentially what it's for. Some other libraries we're actually going to use, and some of you might be excited about this. We're going to use Twitter's Bootstrap. We're also going to use TinyMCE. Are any of you familiar with TinyMCE? No? CK Editor? Frola? No? None of those things? What's that website that does like Medium? You guys familiar with Medium? Have you ever actually written something into Medium using their blog editor? Have you used WordPress? Have you created like a WordPress site? Use the WordPress editor? Okay, cool. We're going to build an editor is what I'm trying to get at. We're going to implement an editor because we're going to build a blogging platform, essentially. And so the best way to build a blogging platform and give you the most control over actually creating a blog post is to give you a nice WYSIWYG editor. So we're going to incorporate, I don't know if it'll be TinyMCE. It might be TinyMCE. It's not the one I'm most, I don't know. It's not the one I find the best. There's a lot of others like Summernote and stuff that are a lot better. I really like Frola. It's really pretty. Actually, I use Frola to create these lesson plans. So yeah, we'll decide at the time. We might even take a vote. Cool. We're going to use React Router, which allows us to do routing from the front. But obviously, that'll be in the following 6 weeks, so don't worry about it. We're going to use bcrypt authentication. We might use Passport. I'm not sure yet. Passport, I found last time I taught this class, was so complicated and wound up taking almost 2 full classes just to get through our authentication, just because Passport is really complex. Whereas bcrypt, all we really need to do is hash our password, shove it in the database, and call it a day. So that's what I'm trying to really look for. But we might take a look at Passport a little bit just so you understand and you're aware that the beast is out there and you should at least acknowledge that it exists. And then we're going to use something called Axios, which will allow us to be able to connect React to our node. And the way we're going to do that is treat Node almost as an API. So you're going to get a lot of experience doing API calls. So pretty full class, actually, for 12 actual lessons. So that also leads into the whole aspect that you guys lose 3 classes. Wonderfully enough, this is probably one of the things I hate most about the summer semester. You lose, let's see, July 1st. You lose, there's something else, May 2-4. Yeah, May 2-4. And then August long weekend, the civic holiday. Yeah, which is BS, right? But you lose those 3 classes. And because you lose those 3 classes, like, I mean, you lose them. Like, I don't get paid to teach it. I don't get anything. So you lose 3 full classes. So when I did this the last time, I was like, you know, fuck the man. I'm not teaching it. You're not paying me. Blah, blah, blah. That was bad. That was a bad idea. So what we're going to do this time around, because I'm teaching this class to another class on Thursdays, and they get all 14 classes in a row, what I'm going to do is it will be up to you to watch the Thursday's class video so that you stay caught up. So we're never going to, you know, how to put it? We're never going to miss a class. You'll just be responsible for making up that class on your own. So that kind of sucks, but it's necessary just because there's so much content to cover, and missing any of this content is really just a disservice to you. So I think that's the easiest way to do it. Plus with Slack and being able to communicate with me through Slack, if you get stuck, you know, we can always have a discussion, and then I can always meet you here early if, you know, you need some in-class help or anything like that. Okay? And we'll always be recapping at the beginning of every single class. All right, cool. Any questions about any of that stuff? No? All right. Let's talk about our example project a little bit. So our example project is going to be a blogging platform that will allow multiple blog categories. So you'll actually be able to categorize your blogs. Multiple blogs, obviously, right? Authors, you'll be able to support multiple users. And anonymous commenting. So people will be able to actually comment on your blogs as well when we're done. We will hopefully end with a WYSIWYG editor. That's the goal. To make adding new blogs interactive and simple. And then ideally we'll also be able to support a feature image. So you'll be able to actually upload an image as well when we're done. Blogging platforms are great for this type of stuff because it definitely demonstrates so many key challenges that you will encounter when you're working with server-side technologies and trying to create a full web application. So yeah, I feel like blogging platforms is definitely the best way to go because you'll see the challenges that we'll encounter, that you will encounter in most situations that you have to deal with. I find that things like an e-commerce cart and stuff like that have been done to death. This is something different. Sound good? Like, I mean, we don't have to do this if you have something better. No? All right, cool. Let's do it. Okay, so for the next 14 weeks, let's take a look at what the next 14 weeks are going to look like. Today, intro, JavaScript review. That's basically it. We might even end early. You guys can run out, you know, enjoy the campus, whatever. Simple node server and deploying to Heroku will be next week. So I'll be primarily using Heroku as my deployment. A, it's free, right? It's entirely free. B, it supports tons of different types of resources like Mongo and also Postgres and anything else. So you can actually do more projects on it. You can have an endless number of projects on that server, which is good for you. Plus, I tend to like it because it gives you that experience of going from GitHub and deploying from GitHub directly into your production server. So you'll get to have that whole experience, which is something you will commonly encounter in the wild as well. Now, if you have your own server and you want to do your own server, that's totally fine. If you want to roll Azure, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But I do recommend challenge yourself and work with something like a deployment solution like Heroku because it's definitely worth your while. And we'll be going through the whole setup next week and everything else as well. So, and creating our Git count and all that type of stuff. Cool. The simple node server will just basically deliver some very simple node pages. That's basically it. Next, we're going to be talking about MVC. Yes, I know you guys did a class on MVC. We're going to take a look at the MVC in detail using some application flowcharts and take a look at how the whole request cycle actually works from when the user types the address into the address bar and where we go for each type of MVC route through our whole CRUD operation. Then the following week after that, we're going to be taking a look at MongoDB and models, and that will be a 2-week kind of thing because we'll be implementing Mongoose, creating models, creating authentication, or sorry, not authentication, we're creating validation, doing some associations, that type of stuff, and it will take quite a bit to set all that up. Then we'll be doing our basic authentication strategy on the Node side, so how we're actually going to validate requests from Node, and then it'll be the midterm. And then that's it for Node. We'll be done for that part for Node. After that, we'll be doing React.js, starting in week 8. We'll be taking a look at how to keep it dry using things like components. We'll be taking a look at working with React and Node.js using it as an API, and that will take 2 weeks to do. And then we'll be doing authentication in React. And then, if we have time at the end of that, we'll be utilizing TinyMCE or some sort of WYSIWYG editor and implementing that into our system. Okay? So quite a bit of stuff. All right, I need to share this screen. It says it's mirroring, but it is not. There we go. I need to open actually as a PDF. There we go. Cool. You're going to see a little table here. I recommend taking a look at it. This table is basically the breakdown of how we're going to do actual gradables in this class. This class is so big, and there's so many students, and I hate marking as much as you hate doing assignments. So I want to make sure that's as easy and painless as possible. So it's very little in the actual aspect of marking. In-class quizzes will be done at the beginning of the class, so we'll do a short review, and then there'll be an in-class quiz that'll take you roughly 10 minutes. You'll complete it in class, submit it, and you get 1%. That's worth 10% of your grade. They will be probably a max of 10 questions, not much more, right? And they'll just cover whatever we did the week prior. The labs, there's only 5. 5 labs, that's it. The labs will entirely encompass an idea. Because an idea takes a couple of weeks to get through, there's no point in doing a lab at the end of every single class. It's just a ton of work for you and a ton of work for me, and it doesn't serve any purpose because you're just basically building on the same idea over and over again, right? So we're going to do 5 labs altogether. The first term will actually encompass 3 of them because it will be constructing a simple node server and deploying it will be your first lab. The second one will be basically your create and read operations using Mongoose. And then there'll be basic update and delete operations using Mongoose. So that'll be your first 3 labs for this term. The last term will be a simple React.js setup and deployment. So basically setting up React, deploying it to Heroku and making sure it actually connects out to Node, and then working with API data in React.js will be 5 labs. Labs, interestingly enough, can also be completed in groups. Your groups can be up to 4 people. And I recommend that your group be the same group that you choose to work with on your project. So just do the whole thing together, all together. It makes things a lot easier for you and me. All labs will be deployed to Heroku or wherever you choose, right? And we'll have a GitHub counterpart. So all code submitted to me will have a GitHub counterpart. If you don't know how to use Git now, I recommend taking a look at Git courses online. They take like 15, 20 minutes to run you through Git. Make sure you fully understand Git. Next week, we will be covering a little bit of Git, but not a ton. Okay? So definitely brush up on Git on your own because it is something that's very common in the industry to know how to use. And it will be kind of expected that you know what Git is and how to use Git. Okay? Cool. The project will be the bulk of your grade. It's basically broken into 2 parts. It's worth 40% of your whole grade. And it will be broken into a Node.js half where you actually, that's over the next 6 weeks, you'll build the Node.js server and get all that running. And then the second half will be React.js. Again, you can work with people in a group scenario, up to 4 people in a group. These can be completed by an individual. Like they are encompassable by an individual. However, what I would recommend is make friends. Make friends and try to work in a group if you can, because it is a better scenario with this type of stuff when you can be able to bounce off your colleagues and help try to figure this out without any penalty of misconducts or anything like that, right? So it makes things a little bit easier. Cool. Last, there's 2 major tests, midterm and a final. I'm not sure if what I've written here will actually be true. Usually, the last time I taught this, it did contain 2 pieces. There was a question part where you actually answered questions on Blackboard, and then there was like a practical portion, and Connor can tell you how much of a nightmare that was. We went way over the time. We took a midterm that should have been 3 hours, and we went to 6. We went to 6 full hours to complete a midterm, which was absurd, absolutely absurd. So I've definitely learned from that. So the practical in this portion will definitely be 1 hour and 50 minutes. It'll be something you can complete within 1 hour and 50 minutes. Now, chances are what that will mean is you will start with the starter app. Like a big chunk of your app will already be done, ready to go, and then you will just add in the bits and pieces that need to be added in. And, interestingly enough, tests are group-based. So you'll be in your groups. So you'll be able to work with your group and complete the whole project within the time period allowed. Now, the time period will be based on the fact that an individual can complete it within the time period. So don't worry about it if you don't want to work in a group, that's totally fine. You will have time to complete it within your time period. That seems like a good thing, but I will warn you, in the past, it has not been a good thing. What I have found is that group members can trip over each other. So understanding Git, understanding how to branch and create individual branches is super important so that you don't wind up blowing each other's branches out of the water. But yeah, we'll talk more about that. Maybe we will do a little bit more about like branching and stuff like that next week. Okay, cool. Any questions about any of that stuff I just talked about? No? All right, you'll just slack me anyways. Yes. What the fuck, Sean? All right. Class etiquette, he says after dropping the F-bomb. All right. So, obviously, typical things expected of an adult, right? Be respectful to each other, be respectful to me. Essentially, it's just more talking when I'm talking kind of thing, especially if we're dealing with a complex topic. It makes it very difficult if people are talking and I'm trying to express this complex topic, because even though it might be hard for me to hear you, the guy sitting next to you is hearing it clear as day, right? Which makes it very difficult for them. So just keep that in mind. Be on time. I always start. Every class I've ever done, I start 2 minutes past the hour. It seems to be like the golden number that just covers those people that are just slightly late, right? So that way nobody misses anything. So it'll always be 2 minutes past the hour that we'll start. Participate in class discussions, because it definitely makes my life a lot easier if I'm not standing up here talking for 3 hours straight and just a sea of blank stares, right? So definitely, please give feedback. If you learn something new, challenge me. I love to be challenged. So definitely give me some of your feedback. If you know something more about React than I do, which is definitely possible, I work in about 8 different languages at all times, so I don't know everything. So definitely, please give me your feedback if you have a solution that's better than the solution I'm presenting, okay? Also, it helps me learn who you are, right? I know many of you. Some of your names I don't remember, and I'm going to apologize in advance. But I know most of your names. All right, but it helps me actually learn your name a little bit more. Also helps me to identify yourself as a competent colleague, right? Because when you're asking questions and you demonstrate, even if it's like, I used to do this, maybe it's pretentious, but I would ask questions I already know the answer to because I knew other people were confused about it. So I would try to pull information from the instructor that was relevant to help other people. And I've had students do that I'm like, yeah, you know the answer. You totally know the answer. But you're doing it on purpose to do that. That's a cool thing. Plus, it also helps demonstrate to your colleagues how egotistical you are. No, it demonstrates to them. It demonstrates to them that you know what you're talking about. So when they're like group selecting, they're like, oh, Allie knows her shit. Let's get Allie in our group, right? That kind of thing. It definitely helps people kind of build that respect. It also helps your networking, because you have no idea how many times you're sitting there. Oh, Connor Minley is an exact example of this. Sitting there, my boss says, we need to hire a JavaScript guy. Yeah, that's Connor. Definitely Connor. He's like, do you know his information? I was like, I got his card. I don't know how, but I got his card. Let's go. Give him a call. Now Connor's full-time with us at G-Shift and making a decent wage for a starting position, right? So it's definitely worth your time to be on the tip of somebody's tongue, right? So promotes class engagement. When other people talk, it gets other people talking. It kind of pulls people out of their shell, and everybody kind of gets interacting. you may not know this, but I have severe anxiety. So when I come up here and I talk in front of people, it's a lot. Like the first time I did this, I nearly passed out. I talked for 10 minutes, and then I was like, let's take a break. And I like ousted everybody out of the class for like 10 minutes just so I could regain my composure. Over the years, I've gotten a little bit better at it, and I don't necessarily get that anxious. When somebody asks me a question that is not here or here, then I'm like, oh, fuck. Right? And I get that shutdown mode. So you're not alone. If you feel anxious or anything like that, I feel anxious. Other people feel anxious. It's always a difficult thing to talk in front of a group of people. But just rip off that Band-Aid and go for it. That's really the best advice I could give. Plus, it makes the 3 hours fly by. Like, I mean, we're at 5:35, right? We're already a half hour in, and it's been going pretty fast for me. I'm not sure how it's going for you. That fridge is really noisy. Also, complete the in-class examples. I cannot stress enough, complete the in-class examples. I want to say that Node.js is easy, but it's not. JavaScript, if you remember from last semester, is not easy. There is a lot of things around JavaScript that can be like little slight nuances that can definitely wreck your life, right? So do the learning in class because it will help you to be able to go back. None of your projects will involve something you haven't learned in class. I won't ask you to do something you haven't already done. So you'll be able to go back in your projects, and even during your tests, you'll be able to go back in your project and go find your solution and then try to modify your solution so it works for whatever you're building now. Okay? There'll always be examples of what you need to do. So make sure you do the in-class because it will definitely be handy for you to do. Or just select that one group member to do it for you. Right? But you should know it because that leads us to group work requirements. Cool. Any questions about the etiquette stuff? No? All right. So group work requirements. So there is a Google Sheet, and I'm trusting there won't be a ton of dick jokes on there. Please. Right? Just the Google names, just your group names, that's it. No extra feedback. Well, I'll give extra feedback, whatever, I don't care. Anyways, but make sure you put your groups in there. So if you click that link, there's a link. That's not the link. Where did I put the link? Oh, it's under Blackboard Resources Group Member Sign Up. So if you go to Resources, Group Member Sign Up, hopefully you all have Gmail accounts. I doubt there's anybody in here without one. If you don't, you may have to register for a Gmail account. All right, cool. I can see people diving in. So if you know your group already, go ahead and give yourself a group name. Write out your members. You can have up to 4 members. This project ID can remain blank, right? Because obviously you need to talk about it. I'm not going to expect you to know that off the top of your tongue, right? Plus, you need to know what the requirements are before you come up with the project idea, and we'll be talking about that next week. But you can definitely figure out who your group members are going to be and select that over the next couple of weeks and then fill that out. There's enough for 10 slots. If you wind up getting past group 10 or group 11, and there's no slots, just create a new one, right? And add the members in. That's totally fine. The reason why I want to do it this way is because Blackboard actually supports groups, and groups are fantastic for me because I can give 1 mark and all 4 of you get marked at once. In the past, I've had an issue where people get left off of the README file, or I miss the name on the README file, and then they get a 46 in the class. Meanwhile, they haven't been marked for 2 group projects, that kind of crap. And it's really annoying for everybody involved because then I have to send off a form letter to Banner to basically request the grade upgrade and stuff, and it's really annoying for everybody. This makes that seamless. You'll get your grade. You don't have to worry about it at that point. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Cool. Dude. All right. So yeah, you're going to sign up to that. So group-based assignments require a group assessment from each member. So I'm going to, there's like an application online that allows you to assess anonymously so that you can assess the members of your group. It's not anonymous to me, though. I can see who assessed who, right? But it's anonymous to your group members. So you'll be able to actually give a proper valuation. For the most part, I've never really had an issue of a group member assessing another group member poorly. That's not really common. It's really uncommon. But there is on occasion where you're working with somebody and they're just not pulling their weight. You're doing 90% of the project. They're doing less than 10% of the project, right? And you're heading towards that bad grade. Sometimes that information to me can help you out, right? So it's definitely worthwhile. So you will be required to do a group assessment. Group members are required to be equal contributors. So that whole 90-10 thing is not a thing, right? You need to all do your equal weight. So if there's 4 of you, you need to do 25% each. If there's 3 of you, 2 of you need to do 33%, 1 of you needs to do 34. All right? What else? You're not required to work in a group, but it is recommended because that whole colleague base. One big thing is like when you leave and go get a job, if you're like an individual and you only want to work as an individual, you're going to have a real difficulty working in an environment where there's other people, right? So it's definitely a good idea to kind of get used to that now, especially working with collaborative tools, right? That's the big thing, I would say, is the reason why working in a group is a good idea, because understanding how to use Git in a collaborative way is like not what you would expect, right? Because you guys have been taught so far to just basically pull and push to the master branch, right? When you work in a collaborative environment, that doesn't work, right? You've also been taught, single servers, just production, production, production. But that's not the case in most environments. Collaborative environments generally offer a branch per user. They have their home development box. Then there's usually a staging server that you push to so that you can test and make sure everything works in the environment, and then a production server. Right? So there's like usually steps that go through. You probably know what I'm talking about, Tony. You guys do that where you are? Yeah. And we do that where we are too. So yeah, it's a very common environment to work in, and I want that to be a part of this class, that you understand that, you're not just getting the fundamentals, you actually get a little bit of insight to what you would do in the industry, right? So that way you have experience. When you walk in and be like, cool, do you want me to create a branch for myself? Awesome, and you're off to the races instead of asking those fundamental questions, right? All right, cool. Group dynamics. Yes, that's obviously a thing. It happens every so often. Group dynamics are disagreements, conflicts, that kind of thing, right? Because if you're strong personalities, get a group of 2 strong personalities, and they both have such creative charisma, yeah, you can get some clashing a little bit, right? So my usual approach to this is you're going to attempt to resolve it internally first, see what you can do to fix your issue. Generally, I recommend declaring a mediator, somebody who's just like pretty calm and chill that will try to figure it out. If that fails, then do like a group vote, right? Vote for whatever the solution is that you're trying to establish. And then if all members fail after that, then you involve me and I'll come in and see what I can do to help you. Because sometimes it's just a matter of a different professional approach that you might not be thinking about for that solution, right? And group members found not communicating/working can be ejected from a group only after you talk to me. So don't just kick people out of your group. Make sure you've talked to me about it first. Let's have a discussion. Let's figure out what's wrong. See if we can rectify the issue. Think of me like an HR department. That's basically what it's like, right? Okay, cool. This is the topic I hate talking about. But we have to talk about it. Misconduct, especially last semester. My God. That was the worst semester I've had for that. Okay, so due to the overwhelming amount of misconduct this has been occurring recently, my misconduct rules have changed and become much stricter. And this is kind of due to just student feedback as well, because colleagues of the people that are committing misconduct are getting a bit pissed off about it because it annoys them. And it annoys me a little bit because I work in an industry that is very competitive, and it's currently valued very well. But it's valued very well because the people who can do the work are very good at it. So it's worth what it's being paid. The more Georgian College sends people out who are just going to copy and paste from Stack Overflow, the more that money is going to go down, right? Because you think about it. If I'm a business and I've employed somebody, they work for me for 3 weeks and hand me nothing but copyrighted material that doesn't work, I'm going to fire them. I can't keep them around, right? And the more that happens, the more wary I'm going to be about that starting wage. I'm not going to want to give somebody $60K to start if they're doing 30% of that, or not even capable of that, and I'm spending more time training them, that kind of thing. So I've kind of taken a stricter approach to misconduct. This might seem very familiar because this is almost straight out of the Georgian College Handbook. If you copy a solution in whole or in part from the internet and submit it as your own work, that is misconduct. This is almost like, have you ever seen that Bill Enville, here's your sign? You guys ever seen that before? That's almost literally what this is. If you copied a solution in whole or in part from a colleague and submitted it as your own work, here's your sign. You provided a colleague a solution in whole or in part, and they submitted it as their own work, right? So you've done all this hard work, and you gave it to your buddy, and they're like, cool, thanks. Zip, boop, off we go, right? You communicated. That's usually obvious, too, in this course. Sorry, sidetrack, but it's usually obvious in this course. I had people, I'm not going to mention names, but I had people that copied it so bad they literally copied Buddy's credentials, like his like database connection credentials, into his own work. And he's like, I didn't cheat. What? What? How did you not cheat? These things are the same. All right. You communicated to colleagues during a quiz test or to colleagues who have not taken the test. You have taken about the test content. Wow, that's a mouthful for sure. That doesn't necessarily pertain to you guys because it's group-based testing. So you will be interacting and talking, and there'll be people around you, and obviously they're going to hear you talk and stuff like that. That doesn't really necessarily deal with that. That's more about if I give you guys tests, right, with the data and stuff, and then you hand it off to the other class. That's where that comes into a little bit of an issue. And there's always differences. Just to pre-warn you, there will be differences between your test and the other class's test. Okay? Cool. Any questions about that type of stuff? No. Okay. What will happen if you commit misconduct? So this semester, it's a little bit stricter. Like I said, it follows more closer to what the Georgian College Handbook states. If you commit misconduct, you'll be filling out a misconduct form with me, which will be awkward for us both. The registrar's office will be contacted to see if you committed misconduct before. That's a bad one, because if you have, and you've done it once before, you immediately start at whatever level, my misconduct added to that is. So if you've done it twice, you're out of college, right? You have to actually reapply and then reattend, which is super bad. If you've done it once, then you're immediately started second place, which means you are ousted from my class. That's it, you're done. You get a 0 in the course. And then if you've done it once, you get a 0 on that assignment. And these assignments, like, you got a 0 on the project, that's 40%. That's a hefty grade to get a 0 on. So yeah, it's definitely not worth your time. But what I have found in this course with the group projects, group labs, and group-based testing, I mean, what are you going to do? Hire somebody for a $5 or something and get them to do it for you? Like, that's really the only step you could go at this point. So cheating is, but it has happened. Like, it actually has happened. So I'm hoping it doesn't happen this time around. I know most of you. You guys are pretty awesome, so I'm confident. Okay, why do I care if you commit misconduct? I already stated our industry is cheapened by students who have diplomas and can't complete the work. It reflects upon Georgian College as a credible school by releasing incapable students. I don't want the bad reputation that I think is already kind of there. I want a good reputation, obviously. And it shows you're a student who doesn't deserve the position you've received when there is a massive waiting list of potential students to take this program, right? That's a crappy thing. One thing I will say, something I don't think I've ever said before, I challenge you guys as colleagues of other people. If you witness misconduct, I'm not telling you to be a rat. Don't be a rat, right? You don't want to be that person. Belittle them, humiliate them, make them feel like shit for it. Because that's really what you should do. Like, if you were working in an industry and you're working with another person and they're handing in crap code, and you're constantly fixing it, you're going to do that. You're going to belittle them, you're going to humiliate them, you're going to make them feel like shit because it's going to piss you off, right? I'm telling you that from experience. The same thing should apply in college because it affects you. It affects your income, your potential income leaving, right? So you want to make sure you want to keep that nice and high. So yeah, call them on it. You guys know Rick Berta, right? Rick? He's got the tattoos? Yeah. Rick does that. Yeah. Rick calls people on that. And it has, I don't know, it has an effect. It definitely works it. It might sound kind of jerky-ish. I'm a Gen Xer, you guys are millennials. Part of that comes from the anger of Gen Xers, right? But it's definitely, you want to protect your income exiting college. Makes sense, right? All right, cool. Our class structure. Any questions about the misconduct stuff? No, you probably hear it in every class, literally every class. Okay, so projected class structure. This is subject to change because most of our classes will be interactive, and most of the classes will take the whole time just doing interactive stuff. So, but based on that, there will always be a previous class review, so we'll always talk about what we did the week prior so that you get a recap. You'll always have the chance to do a 10-minute quiz. The quizzes will close out the following day, so if you don't get them done during that 10-minute time or you're late or something like that, you at least have one carryover day. The introduction to whatever we're going to be learning that day We will try to do a simple activity that will reflect what we're going to learn that day. Most times I find that it creates too much redundancy, so we might just break into whatever it is we're actually working on. Elaborate activity, adding a new component to our example project. So we'll always be building on the, I'm not going to call it WordPress, but you know what I mean, right? We'll always be building on the blogging platform. We're going to do a discussion question period. So after we do that, we'll talk about it, try to iron out any misunderstandings or help facilitate any new learning that you need. And then breaks. So we'll try to take 2 breaks per class. We're actually coming up onto 1. We'll try to take 2 breaks. I've had people request in the past that, 2 breaks is too much, let's just do 1 and then just power through. This material is so dense, you need to just break, give your brain something else to think about for 10 minutes and then come back to it instead of just powering through. I need to do that too because it's a lot. Okay, cool. So, an example project, an in-depth look. I'm ever happy you guys agreed to doing the blog because this would make no sense otherwise. All right, so our example project will be a blogging platform. Below is the breakdown. This week, obviously, we'll not be building on the blogging platform because we'll just be doing review. But next week, we'll be setting up our Node server. So we're going to start with just creating a basic Node server. When I last taught this, we did Express Generator. I'm not doing Express Generator this time around. We're going to build it from scratch. There's just really no reason to do the Express Generator. Pieces of it are deprecated. We had errors that were in it. It's just not worth it. We're going to just build it from scratch. It doesn't take long to do. It's about 30 lines of code. It's really cool and it's easy to do, so we might as well just do that. We're going to deploy it to Heroku, and that will be our first part of our actual blogging platform. The second piece, we're going to create some basic routes, some very basic views, and some controllers, which we'll explain during week 3. We're just going to create a home page, an about page, and a contact page. We might even add a Google map to it, just so it looks kind of nice. Creating the logic for adding a new author and draft blog post will be week 4. Updating a draft blog post and deleting a post will be in week 5. Adding user authentication to our project will be week 6. Converting existing pages over to React will be week 7 and 8. Converting our Node.js app to API only and getting our React.js side to actually connect to it will be in week 9. Then we'll be creating a commenting and rating system. The rating system might die in a fire, but we'll at least do the commenting. Connecting our authentication using JavaScript web tokens, so you guys will get experience with JWTs or JOTs. Some people call them JOTs. JOTs are really important to understand because once you've authenticated, you don't want to have to keep re-authenticating the user, so you use a JOT to kind of pass the authentication through. And then converting our blogging block to a tiny MCE or some kind of WYSIWYG header will be week 12. Okay. Cool. Styling and presentation. To simplify styling, we'll use Twitter's Bootstrap. We'll use Font Awesome 5. I think I even give you the one that I actually paid for way back, so you get like all the extra icons. We'll be using list.js. List.js is really cool. You create a table, you apply list.js, and now you can sort and filter that table like really quickly without needing to do like server-side sort and filter. We'll be using select2 for any cool select boxes. And we'll be using a date picker. I can't remember the name of the one that I tend to use. I think it's Bootstrap Date Picker for actually doing scheduled published dates. So we can actually schedule a blog post to publish on a certain date. Cool. Looks like we're taking a break, which I think is a good point. Yeah, because it's 5:50 and we've been powering through. Any questions before we take a break for 10 minutes? No? Awesome. Let's take a 10-minute break. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to do some fun stuff. No more lecture stuff, which is great, right? Let's get into actually like the nitty-gritty part of it. Now, I like to install Node in the first class because it always takes time. I don't know why, but it always does. Never fail. Installing anything in a class takes a good chunk of time. The good thing is because we're using Heroku, and with Heroku we'll be using a resource. We'll be using a resource MLab with our Heroku instance. We're actually just going to take what our MLab connection is and we're going to connect directly to the MLab connection. So we won't be installing Mongo or anything like that locally because when I tried to do that the last time, just based on people's environments, it shifts and permissions can mess things up. And people have odd permissions depending on whose system is what. Definitely, I will say Macs are much easier for development in when it comes to web technologies, just because they work closer to the way Linux works. so it's more expected. But Windows can create some kind of goofy issues. So that being said, I find that installing this on the first day makes the most amount of sense because it's the day that we actually have time to waste, right? Before we install it, let's talk a little bit about actual Node.js. So Google announced Chrome and it announced its new V8 JavaScript engine in 2008. I'm not sure if you know this, but each browser has its own JavaScript engine built in. The JavaScript engine is responsible for actually interpreting your JavaScript code, okay? So when you hear things like ECMAScript, right, what that actually refers to is a standardization. Has anybody coded in OpenGL before? Or used OpenGL? Yeah, so OpenGL is actually a standardization. It's not a language. It's not a programming language. Its purpose is to basically tell the video card vendor, if you want to call yourself OpenGL 2 point whatever certified, then you need to be able to use these set of function names, and they must take this value in and return this value. That's all it is. Same with ECMAScript. It's no different. It tells you what values you need to bring in, what values you need to take out, like you need to return. That's it, and what it needs to be called. How you, as the actual vendor of your browser, want to create your interpretation of that is completely up to you. That's why some browsers will actually function faster on things like iterations, because they just handle iterations so much better than versus other browsers. And that's why some of the JavaScript rendering is faster in some of the engines than others, right? So V8 is Chrome's, right? How many of you using Chrome, just out of curiosity? Yeah, so most of you, right? Firefox uses SpiderMonkey, which I do think is a cooler name, but not cool enough to make me use Firefox, right? And Safari's it's not Scorpion. That's another browser. It's something like that. I can't remember Safari's, but Safari uses another one as well. V8 actually will take your JavaScript code and compile it down to C++, right? So it'll actually turn it into little code bases. And incidentally enough, if you're that type of programmer who really likes to get under the hood and do some really crazy stuff, you can write your own JavaScript extensions in C++ and then implement them into your JavaScript library, which is pretty cool, right? You can write your own binaries. You can do that with a lot of programming languages, actually. But JavaScript supports, it compiles down to C++, and because C++ is kind of like a mid-level language, right? It is super, super fast, because the next place we go from C++ is to machine code, right? So it's really, really super fast. Chrome compiles down to, I think it's C actually, or not Chrome, Firefox compiles down to C, which is obviously super fast as well. And I think Apple just recently, Nitro, that's what it's called. Safari's is Nitro. Nitro actually just changed up and it's now compiling down to C++ as well. It used to compile down to AppleScript or some kind of goofy thing like that. Now it actually goes all the way down to C++. So these are fast, but again, it's still based on their implementations because when you're actually creating like a for loop, for example, that is a C++ kind of for loop. It's however they implemented that actual iteration in the actual machine language. So that can increase your speed. Anyways, long story short, Node used to be powered by V8. That was like its main focus. Actually, I think I double checked this and I think it still is. I think it changed hands again, and it's now powered by V8. So Node will actually give us a pretty fast actual compilation in our Node. V8's greatest advantage over JavaScript was the compiling of JavaScript code to native machine code before actually executing it. This and other optimizations made JavaScript a viable programming language capable of executing complex tasks, right? Because JavaScript is not limited to just server web-based kind of stuff, right? Like I was saying, you can actually code JavaScript in Unity, right? Which now you have video game development if you want to. React Native allows you to code JavaScript in your IDE and compile it out to like an Apple app or an Android app or anything like that. If you learn JavaScript, you can pretty much make basically anything you can think of, right? They obviously learning things like C++ will give you optimization advantages, but learning JavaScript is not a bad language to learn if that's all you ever want to do, right? All right, so this and other optimizations made JavaScript a viable programming language. So developers decided to try new ideas, such as non-blocking sockets in JavaScript. So they took the V8 engine, wrapped it with already a solid C code, and then created the first version of actual Node.js. Because up to, 11 years. Yeah, up to 11 years ago, there was no such thing as server-side JavaScript. That was not a thing, right? You just coded client-side JavaScript. You could build applications that could compile your JavaScript and render it and stuff like that, but there was no such thing as like server-side JavaScript. That was not a thing. Now it is, right? Node.js uses the event-driven nature of JavaScript to basically support non-blocking operations, non-blocking being asynchronicity, right, in their platform, a feature that enables its excellent efficiency. JavaScript is an event-driven language, right? We talked about that before, which means you register code to specific events, right? So when I hear a request coming in, execute this thing, which you guys know better as when I hear a click, execute my function, right? That kind of thing, right? This concept allows you to seamlessly execute asynchronous code without blocking the rest of the program from running. So we're going to actually examine how this actually works using this very annoying video on YouTube from the code school. I don't know why I still support this thing. I really hate this video. The guy's really goofy. He's really goofy. But we'll watch it. Do we have sound? We need sound. The music is probably hands down the best part. Wait, why am I doing it? Sorry. I'm getting confused. I'm having this old age problem here where I'm getting confused on which screen I'm looking at. With the non-blocking model, we will be just fine. Built on Google Chrome's V8 runtime. I think I'm going to add this to my Google Music playlist. JavaScript code and use the real-time web with Node.
I'm Greg Pollock, and you're watching Real-Time Web with Node.js. In this level, we're going to give you a quick introduction to Node, talk about what it is, what it isn't, blocking, non-blocking, what evented programming is, and then finally what that event loop is that you've heard about with Node. So let's jump into it. Node.js allows you to build scalable network applications using JavaScript on the server side. Underneath the covers of Node, you're going to find the V8 JavaScript runtime. This is the same runtime that is used in your Chrome browser on the client side. What Node does is provides a wrapper around this engine, providing additional functionality for building network applications. It's really fast. Why is it fast? Well, if you look under the covers of Node and this runtime, you find it's all written in C, which obviously is very fast. So what can you build with Node? Well, here's a couple examples. You could build a WebSocket server. So a good example of this is going to be a chat server where you have your browsers, lots of browsers connecting to the server, and there's chat going on, and you're sending messages back and forth between the client and the server, and the socket stays open. You could also do a file upload client. When you think about uploading big, large files, you want to be able to do it in a way that's not blocking. So you can do more than one file at a time, and maybe even start processing the file as you get the first few pieces of it. Also, you could create an ad server. When you think about ads that get served on web pages all over the net, they need to be really fast. These are maybe images that are appearing on other people's websites, and they need to be able to be rapid and quick across the network. Also, any real-time data apps. So not just from on the internet, not just from your browser to your server, but any sort of network servers, maybe even local network servers, would be a good fit for Node.js. Node.js is not a web framework. It's not going to replace Rails. It's not going to replace Django. It's very low-level network communication we're talking about here. There are libraries that people have written that sit on top of Node to be a web framework, but Node at its most basic level is not that. Node is also not for beginners because we are talking about network communication. Node is also not a multi-threaded application. When we write our applications with Node, we write them as if we're dealing with a single-threaded server. Before we get into some actual Node code, we need to make sure everybody knows the difference between blocking code and non-blocking code. Here's some pseudocode to print some file contents. First, we want to read the file from the file system, set it equal to the contents variable, print the contents variable, and then do something else. So we think about how this code executes. First, we read from the file system, we can't actually print out the contents until we've read out all the contents from the file, so it's kind of blocking here. And then, obviously, we can do something else. What would a non-blocking version of this code look like? Well, we might read the file from the file system. Whenever we're complete with that, print out the contents from the file, and then finally do something else. That technique there, saying when you're complete, do this, we call a callback. We're going to call back that function once the file is done reading. Executing the pseudocode might go like this, where we read the file from the file system. We might do something else, so it's simply going to continue on, and then at any point in time in the future, when it's done reading the file, it's going to print the contents. And here's some actual Node code. First of all, the blocking version of reading out the file might look like this, where we're getting all the contents of the file, but then logging that out, and then doing something else. So obviously when this gets executed, it just runs one at a time. The non-blocking version of this in Node is going to call read file, and look at this. We're actually sending in a function as the second parameter to read file. That's our callback. And when we get the contents, log the contents, and then we can say doing something else. So when we execute this, as we mentioned, it's going to start reading the file. It's then going to continue execution, and when it's done reading the file, it's going to print out the contents at some point in the future. Hopefully this JavaScript syntax looks familiar. And there's another way we could write this, which would be just fine. We could declare the function and set that equal to the variable, and then when we call read file, we could send that function into read file. Either syntax would work just fine. They do the same thing. Let's take a closer look at this code, and let's see what happens when we're reading two files at the same time. First of all, if we had to do this in a blocking way, we look at the timeline. If this was blocking, we would read one file and then the next file. However, since our code is non-blocking, if we read two files at the same time, they're going to read in parallel and happen much quicker. Now it's time for our Node.js hello world, or in our case, let's do a hello dog. So our first line in this file, we need to require the HTTP module. So we're including another library. This is how we include libraries typically in Node. We're going to call the create server function. That function takes as its single parameter a callback with request and response. We're then going to write a 200 status code in the header for the response. We're going to write out the response body. And then finally, we're going to end the response connection. We want our server to listen on port 8080. And then to ensure our server is running, we're simply going to log out listening on port 8080. We run the server on our command line. We're going to see that it prints out listening on port 8080. And then if we use the curl command line tool to hit the server, it's going to return to us, hello, this is dog. We could also just call up our browser and go to that port, and we would get the same result. Now let's talk a little bit about how Node executes this code. The first time we go through this code and execute it, Node is going to register events. In this case, we're registering the request event for whenever a request comes in. Once it gets done executing the script, Node goes into something called an event loop. It's checking for events continuously. Did a request come in? Did a request come in? Did a request come in? As soon as a request comes in, it's going to trigger that event, and it's going to run the callback that we wrote and print our hello, this is dog. Now you might be wondering, why are we writing JavaScript? Well, the creator of Node, Ryan Dahl, wrote this really good quote which kind of explains why. I'll let you read it. So JavaScript makes it really easy for us to program in an evented way, to do evented programming using that event loop and write code that is potentially non-blocking. When we run a Node application, like we said, it registers a bunch of events like request, connection, or close. And those events sometimes even trigger even more events. And then we have this event loop, which is constantly looking for events. And once our application gets into that event loop, it can start triggering and emitting events into what we might call our event queue. So if a request event comes in at the same time as a close event, well, events are going to be processed one at a time on our event loop. Let's make our hello world code a little bit more complex and simulate a long-running process. So here we're creating our server. We write the status code back to the response. We write dog is running. Now we're going to do a timeout. We're going to pause for about 5 seconds to simulate a long-running process. Once that timeout is done, we're going to write out dog is done to the response and end the response. We're going to pause for 500 milliseconds, which is basically 5 seconds, and listen on port 8080. You might notice here there are 2 different events in our code. We have the request event, which we should be familiar with from earlier, and we also have a timeout event. So every time a request comes in, it's going to create a new event, a timeout event, which will then be called back in 5 seconds. We're going to send in 2 requests to our hello world server with the timeout and see what happens. So our first request comes in, triggers that request event. The request callback executes. That set timeout code registers, and it's going to wait 5 seconds. Meanwhile, another request comes in, triggers that request event again. The callback executes. The set timeout registers, and now this has to wait 5 seconds. Then when our first timeout is done, it's going to trigger that set timeout event, which will trigger the set timeout callback, and it returns that response. Then our second request is going to trigger the event and do the callback, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, 2 requests can happen at the same time, and nothing is blocking. What would this look like, though, if that set timeout was blocking? Well, let's try it. So a request comes in, the request callback executes, and the set timeout locks the world. Right? It stops the world. Nothing else can execute on this process while we are on a timeout. It is officially blocked. So if a request tries to come in, well, it just has to wait for the server to get unblocked. Once it is unblocked, it'll trigger the set timeout event, and so on and so forth, and the second request gets to lock the server again. Obviously, blocking is bad, and you might be wondering, why would anybody write a programming language or a framework that blocks and stops the world? Well, you find this in a lot of programming languages. Often when you do a call out to web services, it'll block. When you're doing a read or write to the database, it'll block. Or when you're calling out to a C extension, it will block. And this is one of the reasons why people love NodeJS. Because from the very start with Node, its purpose was to be completely non-blocking, and all of the libraries that you'll find for Node are all non-blocking. That's pretty cool. Well, we've reached the end of level 1. It's time to get your hands dirty in the challenges. We'll see you at level 2.
So he said that they're parallel, that they will run in parallel, but he's not entirely correct. It's a single-threaded language. The idea of parallel would be that you have actually 2 threads, right? And it means that if I fire off 2 functions, they will literally run at exactly the same time, like down to the micron second, right? Because they can, because they have their own threads. As long as they're only encompassing their own thread, they're fine. JavaScript is single-threaded. So basically what happens is this guy's taking time. He's not done yet. The event queue will continually cycle, and if something else can be executed, it will execute that while this is taking its time, right? So while we're actually waiting for a request, it basically says, I'm waiting for a request to be completed. I haven't got my API call back. Remember the insult generator that we guys, not all of you, but some of you did? We did the insult generator. That insult generator, when we're actually requesting for the insult, everything's still happening. JavaScript is still executing its other processes. It's still continuing on because it's not going to wait for that. And that makes JavaScript extremely cool. It's not multi-threaded. You can do multi-threaded in almost every language I can think of. But it's not multi-threaded. It can be, though, if you ever want to go to that step. You can actually create multi-threaded Node.js applications. So think of that, multi-threaded and asynchronous. That creates a lot of power, right? But it isn't. It is asynchronous. Now, I can see the sea of confusion, and that's totally fine, because we're actually going to do an example of blocking and non-blocking code today. So you'll get to see how it actually works in a very simple way, not the convoluted way he showed, in a very simplistic way. But before we do that, we actually need to install Node.js. So instead of doing this in our browser, in the debugging tool or anything like that, we're actually going to execute this directly in Node.js and use Node.js right out of the box, because Node.js doesn't need a server and all the rest of it to actually function. We can actually just open a file using Node and have it execute inside our terminal. Now, I am curious, how many of you have experience using terminal or command prompt? Okay, that's cool. So how many of you have experience actually navigating your file structures using your command prompt or terminal? Okay, cool. We'll do a bit of a recap, so it's not too much. It is something new for a lot of people. Those of you with Macs are going to love it. Those of you with Windows, you may want to use PowerShell. Your Windows app installation should come with PowerShell. It does make things a little simpler for you because the commands are the same as with the commands that I type inside my Mac. However, if you want to use command prompts, some of your commands are a little different. Just some, not all of them, just some of them. And I may ask for a refresher because at work I code in Linux and here I code on Mac, so it's always a Unix system that I'm working in. So that does make things a little bit difficult. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, for some reason I closed the silly thing. I need to open it. Cool. And there's a link down there. All right, installing Node.js. Browse to nodejs.org. I did have the link in here, but for some reason it didn't. Oh, all right, it's underneath the lesson 1. Aha, there's methods to my madness. Click that download link. Should take you to this page. Now, depending on what you are currently in, it should optimize and choose the one that you are most likely going to be using. However, there's a huge list here of all the different things you can use. Now, I have had this question before. How do I know if I have a 64-bit? Anybody using a computer more than 10 years old? Cool, download the 64-bit one. All right, same with those on the Mac. Actually, you only have the one installation option, so go ahead and click that. Oh, do I have parallels on here? I need to simulate. I just need to simulate Windows for a second, but I don't remember if I have Windows installed, actually. So this might not mean anything. Oh, it says I have Windows 10. But it doesn't work. So obviously it's not there. Okay. I need somebody close by. Are you installing it? Like you don't have it yet, eh, Nick? And you're on a Windows machine. All right. We'll wait for Nick to download, and then I'll use Nick as my guinea pig here, and we'll go through with Nick. Because I think you have to actually add node to your path variables, which is kind of annoying. But there's I think when you go through the installation, there's a checkbox that says add to path variables. So as long as that's checked, we're good. Is it stuck? Oh, yours first.
I already have it.
You already have it. Anybody else? Oh, awesome. Right. So as long as you don't deselect that, yeah. So in your installation, there's an add to path as an option. Just don't deselect it. Make sure you let it add to the path. What that basically means is that in your command prompt or your PowerShell or anything like that, you will be able to type in node space and whatever the file name is. If you don't let it add to the path, you're going to have to literally type in /downloads/node/blah every single time, which would be a real pain in the butt. And we can add it to your path afterwards, but it's annoying. So try to make sure that that path option is selected. Okay? And finish up your installation. I think I already have. I'm pretty sure I already have Node. I think I was using it the other day. Yeah, I'm using 10.5. Which version are you downloading? What is it? 10.15.3. Cool. Those of you that want to know, MVM is a package manager that allows you to install different versions of Node. I have to actually because G-Shift, the company I work for, one of our application pieces uses Node 0.10.3, which is like 6 years old, 6 or 8 years old. And then the other portion uses 8.10.4. So I have to have different versions, and MVM allows me to switch back and forth. All right, so I am using that now. Okay, cool. Okay, let me get out of there, and we'll start from scratch. How many of you are done? Nodes installed. Okay, cool. So on Windows, you have an application called PowerShell if you're using Windows 10. PowerShell mimics Linux. which is really kind of nice because it means your commands are more Linux-based, right? So you can use Linux, you can use PowerShell if you want. It will make doing this a little easier. If you don't want to use PowerShell and you're more comfortable in command prompt, that's fine as well. Either way, you will know you're in the correct screen when you see a crazy, scary, dark window like this, right? That looks like, oh, cool, 1980s, all over again. I'm going to zoom in a bit. Or zoom in a lot. I hope you can see that. Can you read that okay back there, Tina? Like, can you see that from where you are?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right, so absolute step one. Now, your command prompt's going to look a little different than mine, right? You may have, this part here might say C or something goofy like that. You may have this little icon, that's it. You probably won't have the little curly Q, which is totally fine. That's actually called a tilde, in case you didn't know. But this command should be unanimous across everybody's browser. You're going to type in node-v. And you should get a version. I thought I told it to use 10 point. Hold on, give me 1 second. MVM use, what was it, 10.15.3? There we go. All right, so yeah, if you type in node-v, it should show you the node version you're using. Okay, anybody's not work? You getting an odd message in PowerShell? Let's see here. The term node is not recognized. Okay, try opening up the same prompt. Let's see if maybe it's just a PowerShell issue. Oh, right, you will need to run it exactly. PowerShell. Yeah. Otherwise, command prompt should work. What's that? Oh, yeah, you can use that if you want to. Okay. That's totally fine. There is a NodeJS command application it gives you if you're on Windows. I don't know if it gives it to you if you're on Mac. That's fine. We're not going to be using it. Yeah, 10.10 is totally fine. If you want to install 10.15.3, just do NVM because you've got NVM. Yeah, just do NVM install. What did it say? Oh, no, it says you don't have it. Oh, because you don't install it that way. It's just NVM install 10.1.3. You don't need Node. If you have NVM, I would double check that you do. Okay, cool. So that's Node. That's Node installed, right? And we can actually now start doing some stuff with Node. So I kind of we're already in the command prompt. We might as well just create the directory in the command prompt. We might as well create the file in the command prompt because we're already there. It doesn't make sense to jump back out and then go into our IDE and do all that, right? Let's just do it right from where we are, okay? So on Windows, I have to remember how to do this. Pretty sure it's the same. It's mkdir, which stands for make directory, right? Makes total sense. And you're doing this from whatever location you are currently in. So you might be like, well, how do I know what location I'm in? Okay, well, let's back out mkdir. If you're in PowerShell or Mac, you can type in pwd, and it will tell you where you're located. If you're in Windows, yeah, I have no idea if you're on command prompt. Anybody know how to tell where your path is? Command. Is it just dir and it will tell you? Okay, then do dir. I need to print a cheat sheet of Windows command prompt commands. I don't type them enough to remember them. Yeah. Anyways, it should tell you where you are. Now, if this is not the directory you want to be in, if these are not the droids you're looking for, right, then you need to move the directory that you're in. And the way we do that is we used a very handy command called cd. And using cd, we can move up through our directory tree or back down through our directory tree, okay? If you type in cd by itself and hit enter, it will return you to your root user path. So if you're in Windows, it should return you to whatever your home path is. If you're in Mac, same thing, it should return you back to your user's name, right? If you're in Linux, it'll return you to the home path, okay? If you want to create a directory there, that is totally fine. If you want to create a directory in another location, that is also fine. So I'm going to create my directory under my Dropbox instance that I have in my Georgian College directory. And you might be noticing as I type, right, it's autofilling. How's that happening? Well, the way that's happening is as I go to type in a few characters, I hit tab. There we go. I hit tab and it will actually show me previews of all the folders I have available. And it will also autofill your directory path as you go. So I think I'm just going to stick at the Georgian College path for now. I already have a 2068 directory, so I don't want to create one because Dropbox freaks out when you do that because they're like, you already have one of these. All right, so I'm going to create my directory there. So mkdir, and then I'm going to give my directory a name. Now you can use spaces, but you actually have to escape them. So I always like to write on the board, but I'm going to try to refrain from that because nobody can see it. If you want to escape a space, you can write, my escape space, best escape space, directory escape space, ever. There we go. And that's totally acceptable, but you have to escape these spaces. You might get away with it in Windows, but you don't get away with it in Mac. Or you can do that. I might even be able to do that in Mac. I've never actually tried. If I hit enter, nothing seems to have happened. If you get an error, then something bad has happened. If you get no error, it doesn't tell you anything, right? But there's a way for us to tell if the directory actually exists. If you are in PowerShell or in Mac, you type ls for list and hit enter, and it will list all the directories and files that are currently in that folder. If you're in Windows, just type dir. And dir will list everything that's currently inside that directory. And if it happened correctly, you should see your directory in there, right? All right, so I'm going to cd, and I'm just going to type in my, and then I'm going to hit tab, and it will autofill my path in for me. So I don't need to waste all that time typing out all the characters. Tab is your best friend. It will autofill for you. And hit enter. Now I'm in my directory. Now I want to create a Node file that I can use in order to test my installation of Node, right? Because I want to actually test that Node is actually working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. And the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to touch that file. That's literally the word, touch. So I'm going to do touch, the name of the file. Why don't we just call it test.js, and hit enter. How do I check if that file exists? If I'm on Windows, what do I type? I can type ls if I'm in PowerShell or Mac. Windows is dir, right? And sure enough, test.js is there. I'm absolutely okay. There are a few ways I can edit this file. I can use the built-in versions of IDEs that are in the command prompt, like Nano or Vim. But both of those are about as painful as you can possibly get to use. So instead, I would rather use my IDE now. Now, some will actually support typing in open and the name of your IDE, and it will open it for you. Others don't. I have Subble, but I think the best bet is for us to just actually open the IDE. Now, this semester, last semester I used primarily Sublime. I think nobody's ever seen me use any other IDE but Sublime. This semester I switched over to VS Code, and there's only one reason why I switched to VS Code, and I'll show you in a second here. So here's my Visual Studio Code. You are welcome to use whatever IDE you are comfortable with. I would recommend using a web IDE that is meant for this type of development. Eclipse is a little difficult to use. VS Code will give you a lot of JavaScript hints has tons of packages that support things like Node.js, which will make your lives a lot easier. So I would recommend VS Code over any of them. WebStorm's pretty good too. A lot of people like WebStorm. All right, so I've opened up Visual Studio Code, and now I want to open up that directory. So obviously I got to go find it. So I'm going to go to File, Open. I'm just going to navigate to my Georgian College folder, which is under my Dropbox, Georgian College, best directory ever, and I'm going to open the whole folder inside my IDE as a project. There we go. It's in there. Now, I still haven't showed you the best part of why I actually love this IDE and why I've been using it primarily. And I've switched all my development systems, my home development system, my laptop, and my work development system over to this. And it has to do with this particular thing. Let me zoom in so you guys can see what's going on here. You can go away. Let me shrink this down a little bit. See my little light bulb there? Cool. Let's write something out to the screen. Synthwave. Is that not the most awesome thing you've ever seen in your life? That alone sold me on using VS Code. It was just so I could have Synthwave as a theme. Okay, console log. Let's add in some text. Hello, world. Boom. That's all we need in there. We don't need anything more exciting than that. Zoom in a little bit more because it's kind of hard to see, and I'll collapse my side panel. All right, so I have hello world. My IDE is also kind of annoying and doesn't like me using double quotes. It only wants me to use single quotes. All right, everybody got their console log printed out? Anybody not? You don't have your console log file created? What step are we at?
I think I got to where we were trying to make new directories.
Oh, okay. Are you in the directory? Like, are you in your best directory ever? No? All right, well, let me show you a very easy way to do this then. If you had trouble with any of that stuff, no big deal. Open up your Explorer, right? Just your file explorer, whatever your file explorer happens to look like. Right? It's usually the little folder. Navigate like you would ever to whatever folder you want to go to, Ali, or anybody who got stuck behind here, and create a new folder in there that you're going to put this test file in. Okay? I will navigate to my best folder ever. Okay? Once you've done that, have you created a folder?
Yeah.
Cool. Make sure you have your PowerShell open in the background and your file explorer in front. Grab your folder, drag it over to your PowerShell, and drop it. Okay? Don't hit enter yet, though. It should actually drop the file path into your PowerShell for you. Did it do that? It didn't do that? All right. I'll go see why. Okay, let's try that CD. So weird. Oh, you're in the directory. That's why. Oh, so you just do CD. You're in. And then all you want to do is touch, type in touch, space, test.js. And that will create the file. Or you can just open the folder in your IDE and create the file. That's totally fine as well. You don't have to do these painful steps if you don't want to. If you type in touch and then the name of the file, what happens? So test.js, what do you get? So it's not touch. What the heck is it in Windows? Windows equivalent to touch. Oh, it's echo. That's annoying. Just open the folder in your ID and create the file that way instead of trying it this way. I thought it was touch, but I guess it isn't. All right. Yeah.
I don't know if it's a good way to do it, but what I did was FC and then greater than that works.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would make sense because the greater than symbol will actually push the contents from the one into the other. That's how that works. So that is actually a good idea. Or even echo a phrase into a file name. That will also work as well. It might be easier for most people to just open up your IDE, open that folder in your IDE, and create a new file. That's probably the quickest way. For the rest of you, make sure that you are in that directory, right? And the best way to make sure you're in that directory is just cd into it. Right, it's not command. I forget the name. I forget how to get to the beginning of the line. cd, there we go, I'm in my best directory ever. And I want to run my test file. And it's so easy. It's literally just node and the name of the file, test.js. If you hit enter, it should output hello world to your actual console. All right, anybody not get hello world? No? Nice, cool. You didn't get hello world? What'd you get? Nothing? Oh, if you want to do it that way, you would have to do echo. Go back. Or you can just do what he suggested. Go to FC. So type FC. Space. Greater than symbol. The name of the, and then space and then the name of the file. Yeah. And now open that into wherever. Yeah, just open it in your IDE. So you need to open it in the actual IDE itself. Yeah. Some brackets, I guess. And then just type in console log. I'll put the code back on the screen for you here. There you go. So I don't know. Do we want to create another file called review, or are we good to just work in this file? I think we're good to work in this file, right? Yeah. If you want to create another file called review, go for it. That's totally fine. I'm just going to work in this file. Yeah. You got the same issue? There's no X there. Why is this here? Stupid French. Let's see here. All right. All right, cool. So we have hello world. I mean, that's the easiest part. For those of you that are not familiar with JavaScript, this is like the equivalence to like print and a lot of things. Basically what it does is it takes a string and it will print it out to std out. Std out will be our terminal at this point. Console log is doing exactly that. It's printing whatever we put inside those brackets out to std out. You can do that in literally every language. There's some way to do it, right? Okay, cool. So we are going to follow along here. So make sure you have, it's actually kind of annoying, but because you don't have two monitors, but the lesson plan actually has all the code we're about to do in it. So if you do get lost, the code is actually sitting in the lesson plan. You can literally just copy and paste it directly in as well. That's totally fine. But it is there just so you're aware. So we're just going to do a very, very quick review on JavaScript. Just some recaps from last semester. Now I know last semester for some of you was literally 2 weeks ago. So this should be like fresh. You should be ready to go. You should just be, this should be old hat, right? But for some of you, it was like 4 months ago, and maybe you, at your co-op, you didn't do any JavaScript whatsoever. So it might be, you know, kind of lost a little bit. So we'll just recap on how to do some of the basics. So the very basic pieces would be variables, right? That's a good starting point. Actually, I think commenting is probably the best place to start. Comments in JavaScript, very simple. For a single line comment, it's just 2 slashes, 2 forward slashes. This is a single line comment. That's it. Just a nice simple slash, 2 slashes. I think it's the same in Java. Actually, I think both of these are the same in Java. For a multi-line comment, it's /star. This is a multi-line comment. Very easy to create. Comments help with debugging because you can actually comment out lines of code, which you will find yourself doing every so often because you're not sure what code is actually creating the offense. So you'll comment out a chunk of code and rerun your code to see if that was the code that was actually creating the issue. So a lot of people tend to do that. So understanding commenting is usually a good thing to know. Now I think variables is a good point too, because obviously we need containers to store, values that we're going to be using all over the place. There are four scopes of variables. There is global scope, there is functional scope, there is block scope, right? So actually there's three scopes, but there's two different types of block scope. The only ones we're going to be using are block scope, okay? So think about last semester, the only two that you need to remember are what? Does anybody know? What are the two block scope variable modifiers? What's that?
Let and const.
Exactly, let and const. Const means I am not changing this value. This value is never going to change. And actually, probably about 80% of the time we'll be using const because most of the stuff we will create will never change. And const actually gives us an efficiency benefit because it sets the dedicated amount of memory that is necessary for it and doesn't need to be kind of flexible on it. Let we will be using every so often. Let is mutable. It can be changed, right? And it's easy to remember. Just remember that const equals constant, right? You guys have used constants in Java? Yeah, so it should be easy to remember. Const is immutable, can't be changed. Let is mutable, okay? So let's create one of each. I think a good const variable would probably be our date of birth. I mean, it's not likely that your date of birth is going to change unless you defeat time and gravity. 12/22. There we go. There's my date of birth. God, my linter is freaking out. Dude, all the JavaScript you're writing is wrong. It doesn't like any of this stuff. It doesn't like DOB. It doesn't like any of this stuff. What does it have a problem with DOB? Oh, right, because I haven't used it yet, obviously. Okay. Now let's do one with let. Let is something that might change, right? So think of something that would actually change, like your age. Your age will change every single year. It'll increment, right? So we could do that. Let's do that. So let's do let age equal to whatever your age is. I'm 40. Here, I'll move this up because I realize that you guys have a line that I can't cross. And a fridge that won't shut up. I think they get mad if I unplugged it. Actually, I am curious if there's any food in it. I feel like hungry. Oh, there's milk and cream and cups.
Yeah, you get that.
That's it. All right. So now the important thing to understand is that these variables are block scoped, which means they're only available within their block. Now, right now, we've written it at the root level of this file. This is our root level of the file, right? If I want to go down into a depth, I can literally just create a block. I don't have to assign it to anything. I don't have to do anything with it. I can just create a block, okay? So think about all the things that actually utilize a block. If conditions have those curly braces, right? For loops have those curly braces as well. Functions have those curly braces, right? Everything with these blocks would be considered a block scope. There's actually a block scope around our entire file. We just don't see it. It's implied. Okay? If I take const dob and let age, and I move them, I'm just going to hit Command X. You can also hit Control X to cut them. I'm going to paste them in place. If I move them into here, and then I attempt to access either one of these variables outside, so if I do console.log dob or console.log age, right? I'm going to wind up with an issue. Does anybody know what the issue is going to happen? Neither one of these are going to be defined. Why is that? Yeah, because they're in the block. They're defined in this block, and this is outside of that scope. We can test that. Just save your file. Save your file. Open up your IDE, or sorry, your console. Run your test, Node.js, and sure enough, I get a reference error. DOB is not defined because it's been defined inside the block. That's an important concept to understand because you can wind up confusing yourself where you put this, define this in a block, and didn't realize you did that, and then you attempt to access it outside. And then all of a sudden you realize, I don't have access to this variable outside. You can also use this to your advantage because even though those are defined in there, I can come up here, type in DOB, right? I've got these two defined in here, but I have these two defined out here, and if I hit Command S to save everything, just stop doing things. Stop that. It wants them to be on the same line. It does not like that they're not on the same line. So let's just do that. There, now it leaves it alone. And now if I go to Node, I can see I get hello world, my 1984 and 35, and I get no errors. I don't know if I can actually, hold on here, I'll do it one more time. There you go. I get no errors. And the reason is because those variables are defined. But notice I'm also not getting any conflicts, right? Can you define a constant variable twice? No, you can't, right? Because that would be a collision. But because it's in a block and it's scoped to the block, I can. So if I define it in an if condition, I'm fine. If it's in a for loop, I'm fine. While loop, do while loop, anything that uses a set of curly braces or just a random set of curly braces by themselves, I am completely fine because it's scoped to within that block. Cool. I'll leave that there, right? And this file, when we're done, I'll publish it so that you guys have it. I know some of you like to have like the end code. All right, so variables declared with let are scoped to the nearest block. This is very powerful, but can be a gotcha when you're attempting to use a variable defined in a block elsewhere, as you can see. All right, const variables, the only difference between them and let is the fact that they are immutable. They cannot be changed. Once they're set, you can't change them. But what you will see quite often is people assign an object to a constant. And the reason why they do that is because once the object is assigned to the constant, it's only actually assigning the memory address location, which means you can still add things into it. You just can't then turn around and make that constant equal to a string and like completely change what it is. You don't have that capability, but you can add new things to it. All right. Anyways, I meander a little bit. So arrays. Arrays in JavaScript, super simple. They look exactly the same as they do in any language. There is a way to actually write an array using shorthand. So instead of having to do like new array, you can actually just instantiate it immediately in nice shorthand. So for example, we could say let DC equal and add a couple of superheroes in there from DC or villains, totally your choice. I'm going to add some that are kind of random. This is an array structure. An array is just a list of items. Unlike Java, where these have to be data types, which means that this would only accept strings. You could only use strings in this. JavaScript is super loosey-goosey. It's known as duck typed. Basically, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. That's essentially how JavaScript works. It's like, if this is a string, because you put quotes around it, must be a string, looks like a string, smells like a string, probably tastes like a string, looks like a string, it's a string, right? So that's the way most of JavaScript works, which kind of throws people off coming from strict languages. Some love it, because they just love the lazy programming, because it is super lazy programming. But I kind of like it just because it is lazy programming. But this doesn't just have to be strings. I can actually mix it up if I want to. I can add in other things like numbers, booleans, object literals. I can add anything I want in there, and it's all valid syntax. Arrays have a ton of methods available to them because in JavaScript, arrays are actually a object, and objects have properties and methods, right? And because of that, arrays actually have a ton of methods available to them. One of the more common properties that most people will access is, we'll just console log it out, dc.length. Length basically just tells you how long the array is, how many elements are currently in the array. Arrays in JavaScript are also indexed starting at one number. Yeah, 0, exactly. They start at 0, just to keep that in mind. If I want to add new elements to an array, does anyone remember how to do that? What's the method I use to add a new element to an array? Yep, push. We'll use single quotes, my new element. That will now be attached to that array as a new element. We can actually see that. I'll just do console.log dc.length, and you'll see it when we spit this out. And I can also remove elements. I can remove them from the beginning, or I can remove them from the end. To remove them from the beginning, does anybody know the method you use? Splice is one. Yeah, there's a much easier way if it's the first element, though. Unshift. Yeah, unshift will remove it from the beginning. Or is it shift?
Unshift. Unshift.
I think unshift adds. Shift removes. Yeah, it's shift. And then to remove it from the end? Well, yeah, exactly. Pop. All right, so let's remove it from the beginning. DC dot shift, and there's no arguments. It's literally just shift, and it just removes it right from the beginning of the element from the array. Arrays are very, very, very common when you start working in CRUD systems, right? Especially when you're adding tags, right? Or what else? Categories, anything with a list of elements. Arrays become fairly common. They also become common when you actually retrieve your records back. Because when you retrieve your records, you generally don't just retrieve one. You'll retrieve a whole bunch of records. And those come back to you as a list, right? So understanding how to work with arrays is very, very important. Cool. I get to control 2 mice. So much fun. Objects. Objects in JavaScript. I mean, this is probably one of the more confusing things for most people. There are various different objects. The good news in this class is you don't need to know object inheritance at a prototypal level in this class, because we're not going to do it. But we are going to use something called classes, which you're already familiar with because you've already used classes in other languages. So JavaScript ES6 actually supports classes. They are technically under the hood just prototypal methods, but we're going to use classes in this class just because it's a lot simpler to learn when we're building so many different things, especially when we start using React. It makes things a lot simpler. All right, but before we do that, we should still remember at least how an object literal is created. So I'm going to create an object literal. I'm going to do it as a const. I'm going to call it student. I'm even going to end it with a semicolon. I'm going to give it an ID. I'm going to give it a name. And I'm going to give it an age. Object literals are great for properties like this. That's what each one of these things are. ID is a property, name is a property, age is a property, right? This is its value, this is its string value, this is its numeric value, right? Objects support all the native data types, every single native data type there are. Object literals actually also support functions. You can actually write a function as a value directly in your object literal, which is pretty cool. So why don't we do that? We'll do greeting, and we'll just do an anonymous function. Simple object, simple function call, very sweet theme. I'll move it up a little bit so that you can see. I realize there's like a line I can draw from that top there. Save it. All right, why don't we do a console log underneath it? We'll just console.log student. And how would I call my greeting? Yeah, dot greeting with the parentheses. And that will call it. Go ahead and save that. I'll give you a few seconds to finish typing that out, and then we'll run it. Cool. Anybody still typing? Nope. All right. Jump over to this thing, the terminal, command prompt, whatever you want to call it. Do your node test. Hit enter. Whoop. Enter, and you should see all those pieces. There's our hello world. There's where we define our date of birth and our age. We have the numbers 6 and 7 from our lengths, right? And then we have hello there. Cool. Functions in JavaScript are a little different than Java because they're defined a bit differently, but we actually use the keyword function to define a function in JavaScript. Not that it's super hard to do, though. Writing functions is very easy. We can write a function called, let's just do function. We'll call our function, I don't know. Let's call it sum. We'll give it a list of parameters. We'll give it A and B. And then we'll give it a block. Very simple. This is a named function. Our named function is called sum. It takes 2 parameters, A and B. Notice they are not data types. You don't need to data type. Again, this is where duck typing comes into play, right? If you pass in numbers, then it assumes that that is exactly what you want to do. You want to do something with numbers. It doesn't care whether they're numbers, booleans, or whatever. Actually, in fact, you can leave them blank. You don't have to pass anything. It doesn't care. It won't blow up. It won't get mad about it. Unlike most languages, which do get mad about it if you don't meet the parameter list. It doesn't care. Obviously, we're just going to return A plus B. Right? And then calling our function is extremely simple. Console.log sum. I'm just going to do 1 and 2. Which obviously equals 3. Go ahead and hit save. And then jump over to your terminal or your command prompt. And interestingly enough, you don't need to type in node.test.js every time. All you need to do is press up. If you press up, the last command you typed will be the next one that comes up and appears. Hit enter, and sure enough, there's my 3. Right? But you can't see if you're far away. I'll do. There you go. Cool. So JavaScript also supports anonymous functions. And part of the reason is because a function in JavaScript is simply a value. It's no different than like a number, a string, a boolean, or an array, or an object. It has no difference to those things. Those are all just values in JavaScript. So you can actually assign a function to a variable. You don't actually have to give it a name. You can just use a variable and assign the function directly to the variable, which is kind of neat. Because it means you can also pass your function around, like the guy showed, as a callback, because the function is basically just a value. It's just a definition. What actually executes the function, what actually calls the function, invokes the function, are those parentheses. The second you add the parentheses to the end of the name, the function fires off. It executes immediately after that point. If you don't add those parentheses, it's just the definition. You're just passing around the definition. That is it. So let's take a look at that because it is kind of a complex idea. And it tends to confuse people a little bit. So we're going to do it in 2 pieces. The first piece, we will create a function with a name. So let's do function with a name. And we might as well give it a parameter. We'll just say name. return hi. And we'll use some concatenation just to refresh your memory with concatenation. Probably one of the only times we'll ever use concatenation. Most of the time in Node we'll be using backticks with string interpolation. All right? So now, like I said, unless I call with a name with a set of parentheses, those are the half moons, right? Unless I call with a name with those parentheses, it is just the definition. It is literally this and this block. That is it. That's all it is. It actually, the name is entirely meaningless to it. It's only so you have an alias to reference that location in memory. That's literally all you're doing with that name. So I can actually take this name and I can assign it to something else. I can say const what's in a name equals with a name. Now it's very, very important though that you don't execute it. Don't add the parameters. Okay? Just assign it like that. Now, both of those functions will work identically because basically what all I've done is say, hey, what's in a name? You are now linked to the memory address location of this function. That's essentially what is occurring here. So now, to call it, I can say, let's do a console log though, right? I mean, it's the best thing. What's in a name? Execute it, right? And while I'm at it, why don't we also execute with a name so you can see that it still locates the same location. And then go ahead and save those. I wish this little light bulb would not just sit over top of letters. I mean, it is cool because it's like a little fluorescent light bulb, but it's annoying because it's not in the best location. All right, jump over to your command prompt. And how can I execute that code? Quick and easy. Press up. Hit enter. Boom. Now I get high and undefined. The reason why I'm getting undefined is because I didn't actually give it any parameters, right? So let's jump back over to our IDE. Oh, no, it's not. It's because I didn't actually execute it. What do I need to add to this to execute it? That's true. We definitely need to pass it a parameter. Is that how you spell it, Google? There you go. All right. And you know what? I used to confuse your name with Hitesh, so I'm going to definitely do that. It just makes sense. And now you're in the same class, and it matters worse. All right. Jump back over to your command prompt. I'm just going to call this terminal for my own personal sanity. Hit enter, and there we go. The functions work. Both of them work. Because in JavaScript, functions are merely a definition. They're just a value. It's the parentheses operator. It's the execution operator that actually executes and invokes them. And that is definitely an important concept to understand because we will be doing so many callbacks that you're going to want to have the solid grasp of that concept because it'll make it a lot easier than automatically assuming that functions execute. Right? As long as you grasp that concept that this is just a value, even if it's easy for you to think that this is simply text. If you want to do that, if you just want to be like, that's just text. All I'm doing is saving this text. Right? And then when I add the parentheses, it executes that text, like eval, right? But it's not. But we'll pretend that because sometimes it's easier for you to think it that way, right? Cool. Any questions about any of this stuff? Anybody need a break? Allie's nodding. Why don't we take 10 minutes? Is that good? Like a nice solid 10 minutes to regroup our brains? Awesome. Let's take 10 minutes and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, so the next two pieces are control structures and repetition structures, right? So control structures are like your if conditions, switch statements, those things that create control, right? So basically it creates paths. That's the idea. That's why they're called control structures. Repetition structures, for loops, while loops, those types of things, right? So if conditions in JavaScript, super simple. If true, then return do this, right? Simple. Everybody knows how to write an if condition. Obviously, JavaScript, just like any other language, also supports multiple paths, right? So you can make multiple pathways. So you also have else if, false. Helps if you spell false right. Bam, return, do this instead. And then obviously we have the default action, which is else, the third part of the path. Okay. Incidentally, what's going to get returned? This is easy logic. Yeah, do this, exactly. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that's the exact same syntax as Java. Is it not? Does it look any different? Yeah, okay. So let's take a look at actual loops then, right? So if you understand this, you're pretty off to the races. We're not going to write any switch statements in this class, but switch statements take 10 seconds to learn, so I'll show you that if we do one. I'd rather get on to the control statements because I want to show you blocking and non-blocking before we're done this class. All right, cool. So, repetition structures. So JavaScript obviously supports while and do while. You don't generally write a lot of whiles and do whiles in JavaScript though. They used to be like a big common part of like PHP when you're iterating through like result sets. You'd use while loops, and then PDO came along and gave us object-oriented connections that were a little bit easier. And then we wound up with a bunch of ORMs, such as like active record and stuff, which made things even simpler. So you don't generally do a lot of that. We're going to be using Mongoose, which makes iterations a little bit easier as well. So we won't be using while loops. For each basically replaces that. However, we will be doing a lot of for loops, a lot of for of, and a lot of for in. And I would say those are the two pieces that are probably new to most people coming from things like Java and stuff and haven't touched JavaScript before. For in is for iterating through objects, specifically through keys and at a shallow level. And for of is for iterating through arrays. It's like essentially JavaScript's for each version, right? But let's start with the basic one. Let's just do the for. So the for loop, very simple, looks the same as any other for loop you've ever seen. First, you need to initialize a variable. So I'm going to call it I, right? And I'm going to initialize it with a starting value of 0. So let I equal 0. Then you need a conditional check, right? So that whether or not to execute the block or whether you're done executing the block. And incidentally, I don't know if you knew this, you can literally write any conditional check there. Just everybody always writes that if I is less than. But you can actually write any conditional check there. But we're going to write I is less than. Let's do 10. I is less than 10, right? How many times am I going to iterate? Yeah, 10 times. And then your incrementer or decrementer or whatever statement you want to execute after the evaluation has happened, this will be the thing that usually is your condition to change your value, the initial value of I. So we're just going to use I++, right? And I mean, that probably looks standard because that's pretty much the way it is in almost every in every programming language I work in. So, except for the let. The let is probably the only thing that's different. And then in here, obviously, you just do a block, right? Whatever it is that you want to do. So if you just console.log I, it'll just spit I out, right? First time it iterates, I will be what? Yeah, exactly, 0. And then the last time it iterates, it'll be what? 9. Yeah. So that's cool. How does that come in handy for us? Well, quite often people will write an array. Actually, why don't we call it something a little bit different? You know, like we can do 90, 73, 27, 45, right? There we go. I have an array of values. We'll call them temperatures, right? And I want to iterate over my array and spit them out. So I can use a for loop to do that. And it kind of looks a little bit like this. So I'll do for let I equals 0. So that part's the same, right? But now I'm going to check if I is actually less than the value, like the length of the array. So I'll do temps.length to check and see whether or not I'm less than the array count, right? And that works out fine because I'm starting at 0. I only want to be less than the array. And then I will iterate literally the number of times the array is, right? And then I just do I plus plus. So that piece is all the same. And then to iterate it out, I just do console.log, reference temps, pass it I as the index number, and then finish it off. And it's interesting because when I do tests and that, a lot of people do this syntax. Like, a lot of people do this syntax. And there's a much simpler way to do it. The easier way to write that same statement is to take advantage of ES6's for-of loop. The for-of loop is really nice and clean. It's synchronous. It's a blocking loop, which is really nice because you don't have to worry about it happening out of order. It will happen where you put it when you expect it to. So you can do for. You still need an initializer variable, but basically I like to call this like a throwaway variable. The variable is only going to hold the current element of the array that you are on. So whatever point in the iteration you're on, the variable will be that value. So for temps, I'll call this let temp, right? So the singular version of temps. And then I just need to console.log temp. And to me, I like this. It reads better. It is definitely more human readable to me than this, by far. And it's simpler to follow. It's pretty easy to tell what's happening, especially if you try to follow this kind of naming convention where you use the plural to name your array and use the singular as your throwaway variable. Makes things a lot simpler for you, right? And then you just iterate and spit out whatever the value is, right? Pretty easy to follow. And arrays in JavaScript actually have one more method that you will see quite often. We probably won't use it very often because I kind of prefer this. This is my go-to method. But the last way to do this is with a for each loop. The annoying thing about the for each loop is the for each loop actually takes a callback. So you pass it a function, and then it will execute that function each iteration. So the first time it will execute the function, it will take whatever current element it's on and pass it as an argument into the function, making it available to you, okay? So the syntax for that looks like this. And all three of these do the same thing. I don't know, out of curiosity, how many people prefer this way? Just to show hands. Yeah, now a couple of you. How many prefer the of loops? Same. How many like this twisted motherfucker? Okay. Cool. Incidentally though, practice callbacks. You're going to do callbacks all the time. What's that? Yeah, if you give it a second value and you give it I, you now actually have the index available to you in the for each loop. Incidentally though, this under the hood is doing this. It's exactly the same. It's just syntactic sugar for that. That's why when they were actually advising ES6 standard, they were like, we don't need this. This is ridiculous. Let's just do this, which looks like, I think somebody told me it kind of looks like Java's lambdas, like they're in. What is it called? What is the, it's like, instead of you're using a colon or something like that. Yeah, looks more closer towards that type of idea. PHP has something similar to that too. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's just a for each loop. Works kind of like that. And Rails just abandons this crap altogether. We just use .each. Makes things easy too. All right, cool. So like I said, we're not really going to deal with while loops and do while loops. The only other thing I want to take a look at real fast, let's just create a object. Const person equals name, whatever your name is, age, and DOB. I won't make this too complicated. If I want to iterate over a person In some languages, like Ruby, for example, they actually support iterating over this, but they don't call this an object, they call it a hash. But in order to iterate over this object, I actually have a for loop that's available to me to do that. The only kind of annoying part is it doesn't actually iterate and give me back the value. It only ever gives me the key. But then I can use the key to do the reference. So it is clean. And you won't generally iterate over a for loop all that often, but you might. It depends on how meta you really want to be. Again, looks pretty much similar to the array one, where we can say let key. The difference is instead of the word of, we use the word in. And then the name of the object, like so. And now if I want to actually output the value, I can do console.log. And I'll write this in two ways, just because I know you're fairly new to JavaScript. I'll do it in concatenation, and then I'll do it in string interpolation, so that we can see both sides of it, okay? So with concatenation, it would look like this, key. Actually, we'll do it as key. So we'll do key plus colon space plus person key. So you'll notice I'm passing the key to person in order to pull the value out of the object. Just going to go to my next line. We'll do this in interpolation. Interpolation is a little different. In strings, you generally have the double quote, the single quote. Interpolation is done with the backtick. And you can find the backtick under your escape key. It's just underneath your tilde. We do console.log. Just write a couple of backticks. It's not that dirty. I've learned to not feel that it's so dirty. I actually really like them. I've even refrained from calling them the dirty backtick. All right. In order to evaluate a JavaScript expression within my quotes, I have to actually give it a little piece of syntax sugar. So it's a $ and a set of curly braces. Anything, and I mean literally anything, I type inside these curly braces will be evaluated as JavaScript. So if you want to do a full equation, function call, doesn't matter. It will be evaluated as JavaScript. The only annoying thing is it's going to call to string on it the second it's done. So if it returns undefined, you're going to see the word undefined. Right? So you want to make sure it returns something. So for us, we don't really care. We're just passing it the key, which is literally already a string, so it doesn't matter. So we're just going to say key inside it. Write our quotes on the other side of it, or our colon, sorry. And then we just need our value. I really actually like string interpolation. I use it, well, actually Ruby really pushes you towards it. So I use it quite a bit in Ruby. The only time I've had an issue with string interpolation is PHP, because whatever that is not string interpolation. It's just garbage, because the only thing you can output is the variable. You don't actually get to run expressions in your string interpolation. So that kind of sucks. Anyways, so that's that. Yeah, so that's basically iteration for an object. Pretty easy to do. It will iterate through the object, it will spit out the key, and it will spit out the value. Notice the way I'm doing the value is completely wrong in this expression. Did not see that. It's not value. That doesn't even exist. It's person key, actually. Nobody caught that. That's interesting. I tried to use a variable that literally has no reference, right? Because we didn't define it. Oh, that'd be a good test question. Just create a variable, see how many of you actually catch it. All right, cool. Anyways, it is 7:44. There is no way we're going to get this done. All right, I'm going to move the synchronous blocking and non-blocking part to the beginning of next class. Yeah, I'll move it to the beginning of next class, and we'll cover it in the beginning of next class, which is okay, because next class is actually a bit light. So that will actually add a little bit more to the next class. That way you're not here much longer, because it's 7:45. Any questions about the stuff that we covered? No? This is already published, right? I will publish this note that I just did up for you as well because I actually didn't follow this thing all that much. So I'll publish the stuff I did, put it up on the Blackboard for you so that it's there for you for your reference. I do recommend going over the basics of the JavaScript syntax if you're unfamiliar with it or forgotten a lot of it, because we don't want to stop and go backwards. We want to try to just propel forwards, okay? If you have any questions, what is the best place to contact me? Slack, exactly. Cool. And the invite link never deletes, so just go up there and log in. I'll post the video in a couple of days.